Good afternoon, dear students. This is your Sudha ma'am. Welcome to the third session of Lesson 6, that is Reproduction, the generating system. In our previous class, we have learnt about spore formation, which comes under asexual reproduction, and sexual reproduction in mammals, and we learnt about male reproductive system and structure of sperm. And in today's session, we are learning about female reproductive system, childbirth, and under sexual reproduction in plants, some basic points like sexual, unisexual flowers, bisexual flowers, self-pollination and cross-pollination. Let's enter into our topic, that is female reproductive system. The female reproductive system consists of the parts like a pair of ovaries, a pair of fallopian tubes, that is oviduct, uterus and vagina. These are the parts of the female reproductive system. And ovaries produce and stores the ovum. Ovum is the female gamete and this is produced by ovaries. And they also produce the female hormone called estrogen. And already we learnt in our class 8 that estrogen is responsible for secondary sexual characters in females. And coming to fallopian tubes or oviduct, they are the site of fertilization. That means the fusion of male and female gametes takes place in fallopian tube and they connect the ovaries with the uterus. That is the function of fallopian tube. Then uterus. Uterus is a inverted pear-shaped structure and the inner layer of the uterus is called endometrium. And the thickness of this layer increases gradually soon after menstruation. So once menstruation is done, it discharges the endometrial layer along with the blood. So once menstruation over, again the endometrium starts developing to receive the embryo, and once fertilization takes place, the thickness of the endometrium continues and ready to receive the embryo. It provides nourishment and disposes wastes of the developing embryo. That means the main function of the uterus is it is the site for development of embryo. And vagina, it is the part which connects the cervix to the external female body parts, and it is the root for the penis as well as the fetus during the delivery. That means it receives the sperms after sexual intercourse and it also acts as a birth canal. And what happens after fertilization? What happens to the zygote after fertilization? Once fertilization is over, the fertilized ovum, that is zygote, undergoes division. As it moves down the oviduct and finally attaches to the soft tissues of the uterus. So the attachment of the embryo with the uterus is called implantation. So once the implantation is done, the embryo sinks into the soft inner uterine wall, and then these cells of the embryo develop into a membranous structure that help to nourish, protect and support the developing embryo. And during the development of the embryo, tiny finger-like projections grow from the surface of the outer membrane called chorion into the soft tissues of the uterus. So first one layer, chorion layer, is formed towards the uterus layer, soft tissues of the uterus. Then small pools of rapidly moving blood around these finger-like projections in the uterine wall also gradually formed. And these tissues of the chorion and the adjacent parts of the uterine tissue make up the placenta. And placenta is a nourishing tissue. It is formed by the tissues of Corian layer and the tissues of uterus, and it is formed around 12th week of the pregnancy, and it is the important nourishing tissue for the embryo. And under normal conditions there is no direct blood flow of blood from the mother and the developing baby. There is no direct mixing of blood of both mother and baby. The blood systems of the two are separated by thin membranes made up of cells, and they allow the exchange of gases like oxygen, carbon dioxide or nutrients or waste materials by the process of diffusion. Another embryonic membrane, that is amnion, grows around the embryo, and the cavity within the amnion becomes filled with the fluid called amniotic fluid. So another layer is formed, its name is amnion, and its cavity is filled with fluid, that is amniotic fluid. And what is the function of amniotic fluid? The embryo develops in this fluid, and it makes the embryo moist and protect it from minor mechanical injuries. So it protects the embryo from minor mechanical injuries and jerks. Another membrane called allantois, which originates from the digestive canal of the embryo, forms the major part of the tube-like structure called umbilical cord. And this umbilical cord is formed from the digestive canal of growing embryo, and it contains very important blood vessels that connects the embryo with the placenta, and this embryo develops until it is ready to be born. From the 3rd month of the pregnancy, the embryo is called fetus. So once the body organs are formed in the 3rd month, then the embryo is called as fetus, and pregnancy lasts on an average 9 months or around 280 days, and this period is called gestation period. And moving on to the next topic, that is childbirth. Childbirth begins when the muscle layers of the uterus starts to a rhythmic contraction and relaxation of these actions felt as labor pains. So before the childbirth, the muscles of the uterus, they contract and relax, and these are known as labor pains. And generally at this stage, the amnion, that is the sac around the baby, breaks, and the fluid comes out, that is comes out of the vagina. And this is a good sign that the labor is well on its way. That means everything is normal. If the amniotic fluid is released in a proper manner, then we can think that the labor is well on its way. And then the contractions of the muscles become more stronger and more frequent. Then the baby is pushed through the vagina and into the outside world. That means after this, the fetus is expelled from the uterus by the mother, and this is called childbirth. The umbilical cord leading from the baby to the placenta is tied off and cut by the doctor. A small piece of cord remaining attached to the baby, later it shrivel and fall off within a few days. And after the birth of the baby, the muscular contractions of the uterus still continues until they push out the tissue of the placenta. Whatever still the remaining tissues are there, they all will be pushed out. That is called after birth, and this process is called after birth. Till then the muscular contractions still continue. During the last period of the pregnancy, a watery lymph-like fluid called colostrum accumulates in the mammary glands or mammalian glands. So in this, the colostrum, a white fluid-like structure is accumulated, which have gradually been enlarged and undergo a transformation. Here, during the pregnancy stage, the mammalian glands gradually enlarged and undergoing a transformation. And for the first few days of the baby's birth, after the baby's birth, the mammary glands secrete only the colostrum, and it is important to feed this to the newborn baby because it develops immunity power to the baby. This is all about female reproductive system in mammals, especially in human beings. And now moving on to the next topic, that is sexual reproduction in plants. And already we learnt that leaf, stem and roots etc. are vegetative parts of the plant, whereas flower is known as the reproductive part of the plant. So, the reproductive parts of the plants are located in the flower, and the different parts of the flower are sepals, petals, stamens and carpel. Sepals also known as calyx, petals are known as corolla, stamens we will call it as androecium, and pistil or carpel is called gynoecium. The reproductive parts of the flower which possess the sex cells or germ cells are called stamen and carpel. That means the stamen or androecium is the male reproductive organ and gynoecium is the female reproductive organ. They contain gametes. And what do you mean by unisexual flowers? That means the flowers having either stamen or carpel are called unisexual flowers. That means actually the flower contains four layers, that is calyx, corolla, androecium and gynoecium. But in some flowers along with calyx and corolla, either androecium is present, then we will call it as male flower, or gynoecium is present, then we will call it them are female flowers. So, they are having either androecium or gynoecium, then we will call them unisexual flowers. Example, bottle gourd, papaya, etc. And bisexual flowers, these flowers having both the stamen and carpel, that is both androecium and gynoecium along with calyx and corolla are present in bisexual flowers. Example, datura and hibiscus. And moving on to the pollination. What do you mean by pollination? The transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma is called pollination. That means the pollen grains, that is male gametes, they transfer from anther of the stamen to the stigma of the carpel. So, that is called pollination. And birds, wind, insects, water acts as the agents of pollination. These are all the agents, that means they carry the pollen grains from one place to another place, one flower to another flower. And coming to the types of pollination, there are two types of pollination, that is self-pollination and cross-pollination. Let us learn about self-pollination. It is referred to as the primary type of pollination as it includes a single flower. So, generally we refer it as a primitive type because it includes a single flower. Self-pollination occur when pollen grains fall directly from the anther to the stigma of the flower. That means within the same flower the pollen transfer takes place from anther to stigma. And this process is quite simple and fast, which leads to the reduction in genetic diversity. As the sperm and egg cells are shared some genetic information. So, there is no diversity, children. So, there is no new combinations in these flowers because both are from the male gamete and the female gamete are both from the same flower. So, self-pollination means the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of same flower or another flower of the same plant. Then we will call it as self-pollination. Now, moving on to the cross-pollination. It refers to a complex type of pollination. that is primitive type self, and this is complex type of pollination that allows the transfer of pollen grains from anther to stigma of the flower of another flower of same kind. So here the transfer of anther pollen grains from anther to stigma of the same kind takes place. This method leads to an increase in genetic diversity as different flowers will share and combine their genetic information to create unique offsprings. And this concept we will learn more in detail in our lesson 8 regarding the combination of genetic material. We will learn in our lesson 8 heredity and evolution. So with this we conclude today's topics, and let's summarize today's topics. Today we have learnt about female reproductive system, childbirth, unisexual and bisexual flowers, and finally about self and cross pollination. That's all for today. Meet you in the next session. Thank you.